As Sarah mentioned, my name is Julie Diddell, and I am the volunteer executive director for the Washington-Rochambeau Revolutionary Route, New Jersey, easier known as W3RNJ. We're a nonprofit 501c3 organization, and we're incorporated in New Jersey. We are the only organization whose sole mission is to interpret, preserve, and commemorate the Washington-Rochambeau Trail in New Jersey. We are a proud partner of Revolution NJ. And just for some disclosures, W3RNJ is receiving funding support for today's program from the Plainfield Library. Thank you very much for that. And a lot of information that am going to be presenting, I've learned through the writings and the lectures of Robert Seelig, PhD, and Iris DeRode, PhD, and others. And of course, you can find us on Facebook and follow our website. Check into our website frequently for information, but definitely follow us on Facebook. So today I'm going to talk about a little bit about the history of the Washington-Rochambeau National Historic Trail, how it was formed, and I'm going to give you an overview of the trail through New Jersey. Now, I am a history enthusiast. I'm not a scholar. And so if you find that there's information that you'd like me to correct in future talks, please reach out to me and let me know. And also just to let you know, um, I'm always learning, and the whole community that follow this and um, talk about this trail, they're learning new information also daily and yearly. So the trail was authorized by Congress in 2009, started from a grassroots organization that advocated for this to be a historic trail. And it is a historic trail because it presents a national significance of the joint action taken by Washington's and Rochambeau's allied armies in the longest march and most complex military maneuver of the Revolutionary War. Now let that sink in. That's really an amazing feat. And the trail provides visitors with recreational and educational opportunities, and it connects communities through a network of organizations and public agencies, sites, and trails related to the American Revolution. There are dozens of historic sites along the trail, which are on the National Register of Historic Places or have been recognized and preserved by local or regional historic organizations and commissions and governments. So, what is the Washington-Rochambeau Revolutionary Route National Historic Trail? It is a 680-mile-long water and land corridor from Newport, Rhode Island to Yorktown, Virginia. And this corridor, it follows the corridor taken by the French and Continental armies as they marched to victory in Yorktown, Virginia. And there's a time frame that the historic trail focuses on, and that's from 1780 until 1783, when the troops moved through Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and today's Washington, D.C. That is, they moved on their march down to Yorktown, and then they moved on their way back after Yorktown. They moved back north. And it takes us up to the Treaty of Paris in 1783. And it was the final in Yorktown, the final major battle of the American Revolutionary War that led to the independence for the United States of America, with ultimately the Treaty of Paris in 1783. So I'm sure I have some aficionados on the Zoom today. Um, and a lot of what I'm telling you is not new, but it's just good to put it into context for those who may benefit from seeing a timeline of the Revolution in this respect, starting in 1775 with Lexington and Concord, and then moving through the years to the very familiar 10 crucial days in Trenton and Princeton. And when the armies wintered in Morristown, and in 77, when Washington and his army were in Valley Forge, that famous cold winter. And in 1778, the United States and France became official allies. So this was a key date because that kind of triggered what was going to happen with the major French involvement. So let's move down to July 11th of 1780, when Rochambeau, a name that we should proclaim more loudly and more clearly than he gets credit for today. So maybe we can all help with getting his name out there. But it's when his troops arrive in Newport, Rhode Island. And in July of 1781, Rochambeau and the French troops are encamped in Westchester County for about 6 weeks. And then in late August of 1781, the Continental troops and French troops march through New Jersey. That is their march on the way to Yorktown. And then getting to Yorktown and beginning the siege of Yorktown on September 28th of 1781 until the final British surrender on October 19th. So that's the timeline. So you can see how long the Continental Army was on its own until the French arrived in 1780. So the trail is about the French-American alliance and the American Revolutionary War. And as I mentioned, it was 4 years into the Revolutionary War in 1780 when King Louis XVI of France sent an army and arms and gold to help George Washington. And it was under the command of this person, Jean-Baptiste Donatien de Vermeer, the Comte de Rochambeau. And here is a wonderful portrait of Rochambeau on the right of the screen. So Rochambeau brought with him 6,000, about 6,000 French troops, soldiers, including servants, and they landed in Newport, Rhode Island on July 11th of 1780. And this is a recreation of what the troops may have looked like in Newport, and a typical ship of the time that they would have been traveling on. And this cartoon is a contemporary illustration of an interpretation of Rochambeau and his troops. One of the first things that Rochambeau did after he settled in Newport, Rhode Island, is that he met with the Oneida Indian leaders. Apologies for the not so clear image here, but here is Rochambeau and the Oneidas. And the reason that he met with them is, he was looking for allies and information. And the Oneidas were favorable to supporting the Continental armies. So it was really key that Rochambeau, one of his first meetings, was with the Oneidas. So remember, they landed in July, the French, and it wasn't until September that Washington and Rochambeau first met in person, and they met in Hartford, Connecticut. And there they started to plan an attack on British-occupied New York City. That was Washington's goal, to take back New York City. He felt he could win the Revolutionary War if he could take back New York City. Well, it was so late in the fighting season that they couldn't initiate any game plan, so they wintered in 1780 into 1781, and the Continental Army was wintered in the Hudson Highlands of New York, and the French Army wintered in Newport, Rhode Island, and Lebanon, Connecticut. Then the spring came, and in May of 1781, Washington and Rochambeau met again, this time in Wethersfield, Connecticut, and they decided to join their forces outside of New York City for a possible attack on the British forces under the command at that time of Sir Henry Clinton. So now we go. The French army was then on the move in late June of 1781 with a wagon train of 200 plus wagoners, cooks who were mostly female, 210 wagons drawn by 1,200 oxen. So you can just imagine what the scene might have looked like going through these small Connecticut towns, um, and the townspeople visioning this train of troops coming through. And here are some depictions of what it might have looked like at the time. Well, on July 6th of 1781, the 6,000-man French army and the 4,000-man Continental Army, they join up in Phillipsburg, Westchester County, New York. And remember, women and children were included there. There they would spend 6 weeks drilling, planning, getting ready for their next move. If New York was the target, a strong French naval component would be needed. But Rochambeau wasn't necessarily a proponent of a New York attack. He was more of a proponent of an attack in Yorktown, Virginia, and the Chesapeake Bay. So a letter was sent because they needed this French naval component. A letter was sent to French Admiral de Grasse, who was in the Caribbean at the time, with New York City and the Chesapeake Bay as attack options. Now, we've always said that on August 14th, de Grasse sent word, or word was received by de Grasse, that he wasn't headed to New York. He was going to head to the Chesapeake Bay and that he would only stay there until October 15th. So, in other words, if anything was going to be done in the Chesapeake Bay for him, it had to be done before he left on October 15th. Now, I mentioned to you that we're learning new information all the time. And in a talk that I attended from Dr. Iris DeRode, yes, I learned some new information. And Iris DeRode uses August 1st as the date that George Washington made his decision to go to Yorktown, Virginia. In fact, she says it is written in his diaries. So this is really an example of how we keep learning more and adding more to the story. So, meanwhile, British General Cornwallis moved from Richmond, Virginia, to the peninsula of Yorktown, Virginia, with Lafayette on his heels to keep him there until the Allied army could arrive. And uh, Cornwallis's decision to go to Yorktown was very fortuitous for the Continental Army, for the Allied Army, because should Cornwallis face a land attack, he thought he would have an escape route on the sea. And we'll find out what happened next there. So the decision was made to attack the British in Yorktown. So that sets off the next march, a 400-mile march from Westchester County, New York to Yorktown, Virginia, with many soldiers getting on water transports at the head of the Elk in Maryland to sail down to Virginia and the others continuing on foot. And what you're seeing now in this graphic is the multiple trail routes, and I'll talk about this some more, but the multiple trail routes in red as they make their way on down to Yorktown, and then this water route in blue in Elkton, the head of the Elk, going down the Chesapeake Bay to Yorktown. Some of them did get on water transports on the Delaware, also in Trenton. So this is a pretty shocking statement from Dr. Seelig, and um, he takes into account a lot of different possibilities that could have happened to the Continental Army and the French Army as they moved through New Jersey. And that's why Dr. Seelig says New Jersey was the most dangerous part of the march to Yorktown, Virginia. Why? Well, let's take a look at the geography back then. This is a very quaint contemporary map of the time, and here's New York, the island of New York. And obviously, not too far is New Jersey with Bergen here. Or the British could have moved their troops down to Staten Island and crossed into New Jersey in Elizabethtown or Newark in order to come out and attack the Continental Army as they moved through New Jersey. Here's just another map that depicts the same possibility of British troops coming out of the New York area into New Jersey. And if the French and Continental troops were marching through New Jersey or encamped in New Jersey, the British could have taken advantage of that and moved over and confronted them. So this again just puts into perspective what the proximity today, those maps were kind of hard to imagine compared to these maps, the real proximity of New York to New Jersey. So this is the national parks map, and the cutout is mostly of the New Jersey area with the different lines, the colored lines showing the trails, the march trails that were taken. And I'll talk about that some more. So to mitigate the risks of coming through New Jersey, Washington, in his infinite wisdom, created a grand plan and called a ruse de guerre, or a ruse of the war. In other words, deceptions in order to make the British General Clinton not really know what Washington's plans were. And one of the first deceptions that Washington created was to have the French build bread ovens out of brick, bread ovens in Chatham, New Jersey. And these were huge bread ovens, as the picture imagines and interprets what they would have looked like. And why would Washington be having bread ovens built in Chatham, New Jersey? Such a substantial infrastructure. And the thought was that he could make a ruse, have the British think that they were going to be in the Chatham area for some time, and bread was always needed to feed the army. So if Washington was going through the trouble to build such substantial bread ovens, well, Clinton might be thinking they're going to stay in the Chatham area for quite a while. Well, that was Washington's plan, to have Clinton believe that. That really wasn't Washington's real plan. So the next few slides, I want to show you the next part of the ruse de guerre. So we had the bread ovens. And now the next thing that Washington did was he devised his troop movement through New Jersey to be a protective and a defensive, but also a deceptive way to get the troops through New Jersey and avoid the British coming out and attacking them. So what he did and these are busy slides. I appreciate that. You guys might be saying that to yourselves. And I just want to let you know that all these maps are on the W3R New Jersey website, so you can go there and take your time and study them yourself. But what they do show, and I'm going to try and hold my cursor over it, is day by day the different troop movements that Washington devised so that all the troops were not together and that he staggered their entrance and their movement through New Jersey as a protective means. Um, he also separated the troops because just getting through quickly, he needed to separate them. They couldn't all go on one route. It would take much too long to get through to New Jersey. So, for instance, on August 19th, the troops enter New Jersey for the first time, and they're up here in Bergen County. And then I'm not going to go through each slide, particularly, but I'm going to move through them really quick, and you can study them on your own later. And there are legends that identify who the troops were, which regiments they were. So you can see by the 20th, um, they've moved even further, and by the 21st to the 23rd, they're in Springfield now. Then we have the next troop movement coming through on the 24th of August, coming down through the Ringwood area and stopping in Pequannock. On the 25th, the next troop movement coming through, this green line, the 26th, and so on and so forth. And you can see how complicated the movements get. The French are in yellow, so they're way over in the western side being protected by the continental troops who are in this pink and green line. And on to, I want to then point out to you, since we are here talking at the Plainfield Public Library and the Drake House, that on August 29th, the troops did move through the Plainfield area. On the 30th of August, they're meeting up. The lines converge, and they're meeting up outside of Princeton in Rocky Hill. And then they continue on the 31st down towards Trenton. And on September 1st, they start to depart New Jersey, cross the Delaware River in Trenton. And the rear guard of the French troops on September 2nd are right outside of Trenton. The other troops have already passed through New Jersey. So it's really like September 23rd when September 3rd when the final troops leave New Jersey. So the ruse de guerre worked. Clinton never came out and attacked the troops. And it wasn't until they were in the Princeton area that Clinton realized what was going on. And by that time, it was too late for him to take any action to stop them. They were on their way to Yorktown, and Clinton figured out pretty quickly then what their intentions were to go to Yorktown, but it was too late for him to do anything. So I just want to show you a little close-up of the New Jersey map, and again, this is on our website. This is the full New Jersey map with the legends that shows you all the different troops, identifies who they were, and some notable dates that on August 27th, Washington, Lamb, Lincoln are in Chatham and then Springfield. And on August 28th, the French are in Whippany. And then, as I mentioned before, on the 29th, Lincoln with the Rhode Island Regiment marched through today's Plainfield. Okay, and I want to just now show you on this graphic on the right-hand side where the Drake House Museum is relative to the Washington-Rochambeau corridor. So here is Lincoln's line, this blue line, and here is the Drake House. So the proximity is really very close within one block, and one can imagine that the residents of the Drake House at the time may have come out and observed, or it's very possible that even some of the officers stopped at the Drake House. It's that close. So as they make their way down to Yorktown on September 28th, the siege of Yorktown begins. And this was a 3-week engagement of building siege lines and trenches and bombarding the enemy, then moving closer and closer to close the ring of the siege. And of course, the navy of Admiral de Grasse had already come in and blockaded the Chesapeake Bay. So as the siege began, there was nowhere for Cornwallis to escape. It was a 3-week siege of Yorktown, and with the cover of night, of a moonless night, and the soldiers ordered to advance, making no noise, with unloaded muskets, the French soldiers created a diversion, and then the French army and the Continental Army attacked the British for the final blow. Surrounded, outgunned, and running low of food, Cornwallis surrendered his entire army on October 19th. Though either ill, as he claimed, or simply humiliated, um, Cornwallis did not participate in the actual surrender, having delegated that task to Brigadier General Charles O'Hare. But the total number of British prisoners taken was about 8,000, along with 240 guns. And this, I'm sure everyone is familiar with this painting, a Trumbull painting done, many years after the siege. But here is, and as many of you may know also, that if Cornwallis wasn't going to give his surrender sword directly to Washington, Washington wasn't going to accept it from an underling. So Washington had his second in command, General Benjamin Lincoln, meet O'Hare and accept the surrender sword. And over here is Washington watching on. So, as I learned recently, that just like today, we have reporters and photographers that accompany our armies on their missions. Uh, so did back then the armies of Washington have painters uh, join them on their travels and their missions, because then those painters were the ones that could create these paintings. So that was something that I learned recently, and it was like an aha moment. Oh, of course they would have done that, and that was really just something that we now carry on today. So I want to talk to you a little bit about who Rochambeau was, because as I said before, he is an underrepresented name in America. Here is a photograph of an interpreter interpreting General Rochambeau, with an interpreter of Washington behind him. And here are some paintings of Rochambeau. So Rochambeau was born July 1st of 1725, and he died May 30th of 1807. He was a French nobleman and a career military officer in France. And Louis XVI chose him to command about these 6,000 French troops in America and to join the Continental Army to fight alongside General Washington. And it was um, a very humble person of Rochambeau who would accept the assignment of working alongside Washington, not being in command of the Allied armies. And that's really why Louis XVI, one of the reasons why he chose Rochambeau, because he knew Rochambeau's personality could work alongside of Washington, and Rochambeau would not seek the limelight and the ultimate glory. but would support Washington. And after the American Revolution, Rochambeau went back to France. And France then had their own revolution, as you recall, and Rochambeau was arrested in that reign of terror in 1793 and 1794, and he was imprisoned. And he was a mere few days away from the guillotine before he was saved by the overthrow of Robespierre. Um, I recently traveled to France and I had the wonderful honor of going to Rochambeau's chateau, which this is a photograph of it and an old graphic of it. The family still lives in the chateau, and it's not often that they entertain visitors. So I was on a trip with the American Friends of Lafayette. There were about 50 of us, and we went to different historic sites in France, and we went inside Rochambeau's chateau and saw some very wonderful artifacts that the public has never seen, as a whole. Just very few people are allowed in there. So this was a really great experience. Um, and if you ever have a chance to join the American Friends of Lafayette to go on their next trip, and I hope they do another trip, you'll definitely want to take advantage of it. And then I want to talk to you about this person. I hadn't mentioned him before, but Rochambeau did not speak English, and Washington did not speak French. So Rochambeau needed someone who would help interpret his discussions to Washington. And this was the person that was instrumental in communicating Rochambeau's thoughts and discussions to Washington. And his name was Francois Jean de Beauvoir, the Marquis de Chastellux. And Chastellux was a French military officer, but he was more than that. Chastellux was a man, a philosopher soldier, as he said. And I really invite you to not only learn about Rochambeau, but dive in and learn about Chastellux because another amazing character of this story. He was the primary liaison between Rochambeau and Washington. And it's because of Chastellux's earlier experiences with writing and as a philosopher person, attending the salons and traveling to London, he learned English. And also, when Chastellux came over with Rochambeau in 1780, Chastellux went on a little reconnaissance mission with a group of others. And from 1780 to 1781, he went around and kind of scoped out the territories where the French and the Continentals would travel if they were going to Yorktown. And he journaled about those experiences called Travels in North America in 1780, 81, and 82. This is a published book. It's his journal is not entirely published, but this part is published and it's available. You can get copies on Amazon, and it is really an interesting read of Chastellux's interactions with people along his travels. He talks about the flora and fauna, and um, he visited battle sites so that he could then come back to Rochambeau and tell Rochambeau what he found in order to help Rochambeau with Washington make decisions. So definitely invite you to find that book and start reading that. And some historians really do postulate that his travels were this reconnaissance mission. And I think that is being more accepted as a as the reason that he went out on this little travel. So this is a reenactor portraying Shastaloo, and here is Shastaloo in his portraiture. And again, on my trip recently with the American Friends of Lafayette, we also went to the Chateau de Chastelou. The family still lives here. Amazing. And it is an incredible place. And Dr. Iris de Rode accompanied us on this visit to France. And at each spot she gave talks, and it was really just an incredible thing to hear Dr. de Rode give her talk in the place where the person lived, in the place where Shastaloo lived, and that the descendants were there to meet us. So again, a really incredible place. So now I just want to talk to you about what we do today, what W3R New Jersey does today to help, besides talks like this, to help the communities in New Jersey learn about the March to Yorktown, learn about Rochambeau and the other generals, and embrace this history and take it on so that they can make commemorations and expand the French-American alliance. And this is just one example of something that has been done in Westfield. We've started this in 2020. We have an annual March to Yorktown Day, and it includes a parade, encampment of different militia reenacting groups. George Washington is in attendance. You can see here Shastaloo and Rochambeau are there, the 1st Rhode Island Regiment, and of course our local colonial living historians out of the Miller Corey House Museum, and the dignitaries and elected officials. It's so important to include them so that they can embrace this story as well. And you know, as I mentioned earlier in the talk, that there are many historic sites on the trail that take on the commemorations, and here are a few of them. The William Trent House Museum in Trenton, New Jersey, at the end of August every year. They also have a commemoration of their Yorktown days. And the Dye Mansion in Totowa, again, has taken on the story, and check out their website to find out when they're doing talks or reenactments of what happened with Shastaloo and Washington at the Dye Mansion. And then, of course, East Jersey Old Town. If you're not familiar with East Jersey Old Town in Piscataway, I invite you to take a visit out there. It is like a mini Williamsburg. I'm not sure if they like to be referred to that, but it pretty much has everything that a village of the colonial days would have had. Some of these buildings have been moved to this location. It's just a really fabulous, and it's free entrance to walk around and go visit in these different, the blacksmith shop, the printer's shop, the church, the barns, the tavern. So, and every May they have a history day in which they bring in history organizations from all over setting up their tents, and they have reenactments. So in East Jersey, Old Town is on the Washington-Rochambeau Trail. So just some examples there. And of course, just to let you know, the Washington-Rochambeau National Historic Trail is a unit of the National Park Service, of the National Trail System, administered by the National Park Service. So we support their mission and visit them on their website as they start to commemorate the 250th. Also, there'll be a lot more information coming from the National Historic Trail System and the National Historic Trail about events that they're having. So here is W3R New Jersey. Just show you our quick brochure. When you see it, we've been able to give a little encapsulation of what happened on the trail in New Jersey. And to become a member, we invite you all to become members or provide a small donation because we survive on memberships and donations. And of course, the generosity of the Plainfield Library today. And we will be involved in America 250. We will have events joining up with historic sites and then our own events to celebrate America 250. And then just to let you know, there are a few books that you might want to look at and maybe ask Sarah if any of these books are at the Plainfield Library. Here are some that I can recommend to you today. And I should have put on there Chastellu's Travels in North America. So I'll have to do that for my next presentation. And maybe Sarah can get some of these books if she doesn't have them already. But definitely look to purchase them on your own to learn more about the March to Yorktown. And if you'd like to make a donation today to W3R New Jersey, here's our QR code for Square. So please just take a little picture of that. Hold your camera up to that, and we'd appreciate any amount of donation that you could provide us with. So I want to just say thank you to all of you. It's 11:15, and Sarah, I guess we can move to open up and see if there's any questions in the chat.